Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on the website womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 37,302 people from 160 countries and is supported by 518 organisations. We have many volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent, engaged in defending women's rights. Do join us. You can become a member of WDI or volunteer or donate or all of those things. And you can get in touch via the website womensdeclaration.com or info@womensdeclaration.com. Today, I'm really pleased to say we have Helen Joyce from the UK and Ireland. Her talk is going to be trans, feedback, kickback, and the future. So that will be sort of related to the book and what she's doing now. Then we're going to hear from Luba Fein from Israel, and her talk is A Woman's Right to Her Body. Is it relevant to the sex industry discussion? So we're going to go now to our first speaker. Helen Joyce is a journalist, author, and campaigner for clarity about sex in life and law. What were the reactions and what was the reception to the book Trans?
In some ways, an awful lot better than I thought it would be. It was a book that I spent a long time trying to decide whether I really would write it, because I didn't expect that I'd find it easy to find a publisher, and indeed so it proved. But one is enough. And the publisher I got, I couldn't have asked for better. They were just fantastic about it, and my editor was brilliant, and it was actually very smooth. And then it got great reviews. So I've only had a couple of negative reviews, and they're from people I don't think very highly of. So I did get reviews in really nearly all the mainstream British papers. Of course, I am still never mentioned in my home country. There's an absolute taboo on my name in Ireland, in Irish media. It's extraordinary. So the reaction was a lot better than I thought. But I suppose one person's reaction is worth talking about specifically, and that's my own. Like, the reason I wrote this book was to get it out of my system. I really felt like I was being driven mad. It wasn't something that I was working in. I wasn't working for a feminist organisation, though I would also said I was a feminist. I was the finance editor of The Economist at the time that I was writing it. And then running our, I have a habit at The Economist, or had a habit at The Economist, of moving jobs at precisely the wrong time. I took a job as the executive editor for events, which I agreed to start in March 2020. And it was meant to be about traveling around the world, running large events and sharing them and geocloning them. I know. I agreed to do that job in about, I think early 2020. And of course, when I actually came back to it, I had 2 months off to write my book proposal straight before it. And I came back, I came straight into helping that team to move to Zoom. And, I was stuck in Ireland looking after my parents, and I wrote most of the book there. But so I thought that I had stumbled upon something insane. I didn't know any of the backdrop to it. I'd never heard of Janice Raymond. I'd never heard of Sheila Jeffreys. I'd never heard of Judith Butler. I am not saying those three people are of equal weight or eminence in my mind, just three people I had never heard of. And I'd stumbled on this thing, and it was driving me completely potty. It was stopping me from sleeping. And so I thought, okay, the only way that I can deal with this is to write through it, write it all down, and then I will move on. Yeah. And that's the bit that didn't happen. That's the bit that's been impossible. And I also don't want to. I feel like I found what I'm meant to be doing, and I'm getting up every day and doing the right thing. So I may as well just keep going. And so people still want to talk about it. My publisher tells me that it is a book with a long tail. Like, it sold well. It sold well enough to get me into the top 10 the week that it came out. And I think it was in the top 10 a few weeks after that. They tend to go in and out a bit in the UK sales. But I mean, it's still selling. And, my royalty check's still decent, even though the book sells obviously for an awful lot less once it goes into paperback, so you get lower royalties. And people are still in touch with me all the time, and people keep still asking me to come on podcasts. And so it's been quite slow burn. So yeah, I think that's a decent enough summary of what the reaction has been.
You were saying that it was surprising for yourself. Was there anything that you were really surprised about while you were doing it? Did you come across things and think, oh no, that's even worse than I thought? Or can you tell us about anything that was... Yeah.
Constantly, and I still am. It happens nearly every day that I have that feeling. I'm sure we all do, where you boggle. And you
Yeah.
think, no, 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 this cannot be. They cannot be saying that women in prison are kind and won't mind men being put in with them. I mean, 5 years in the trenches, and of course more for Sheila Jeffreys or Janice Raymond, and I'm sure we're all, or Suzanne Moore or Julie Bindel or all these people who noticed earlier than me, they must still be being astonished. I remember that the moment that I thought, I hope I can say rude words on this, the moment that I thought,
Yeah.
holy fuck, was the moment when I really, really, really realized that they meant it, that men could be lesbians.
Yeah.
Like I was so at The Economist, there's a very strong weekly rhythm because it's a weekly publication, and Wednesday's the busiest day, especially for section editors, which I was as the finance editor. And I remember distinctly going into work that day. You go in very early, you work a very long day, then you come in and you work very, very long early from like 6 a.m. or so on Thursday, and then the paper goes to press at 12. But I came in early on the Wednesday, and just before the craziness of the day got going, I went across to a friend, good guy who understands all this stuff and thought it was as mad as I did, but a finance writer. And I'd been going and telling him mad things. And I went into him and said, "You're not going to believe it. They really, really think men can be lesbians. They think
Yeah.
that you're a bigot if you're a lesbian and you won't sleep with a man." And I mean, he's a
Yeah.
heterosexual man married with kids. The two of us looked at each other and went, "No, they." And I'm like, "They
Yeah.
do, they do.
Yeah.
I thought it couldn't be real either."
One of the ways I see it is that they're prepared to give up science and maths, you being a mathematician, academic mathematician before doing all this. They're prepared to give up all of that, both science, rationality, in order to do this, in order to get men into women's spaces. That's my very cynical reading of it. So I think it is like in 1984 where Big Brother said, "Where the party won't need science anymore. We don't, we
And
don't need
the
it."
other thing that has really amazed me and still ongoingly amazes me is that this is an idea that's more popular with women than with men.
Mm,
Like the fact is, if you do opinion polls, if you talk to people, the cheerleaders for this are young women, and they are the people who are most damaged by it. And I have theories about it, and I think that, we can say women are socialized to be kind and so on, but I think too much of those theories, too many of them rest on the idea that women are great and men are shit. And like, there's no doubt, but that the beating heart or the nuclear power source at the center of this movement is absolutely men and their boners. No doubt
yeah.
about that whatsoever. But the
Yeah.
foot soldiers are young women, and there's something very dark about women's psyches, that they are so keen on policing other women, on propping up men's desires, on simping for the men who run the country. And I mean, maybe we shouldn't be so surprised. It's a stable um, it's a stable strategy in the world we live in to suck up to men.
In terms of cancellation, did you get cancelled at all?
So I will say that my employer was supportive in exactly the right way. I don't want my employer cheerleading for me, especially an employer that it has a very strong line. Yes, I mean, The Economist is for open markets. It's a certain view of the world, a 19th century liberal view. So I mean, there's a strong editorial line, but it's a place where that taken into account has a great multiplicity of views. I don't want them going out and cheerleading for me, and I don't want them silencing people who disagree with me. So I think they did that exactly right. All they did was just refuse to sanction me in any way. I wasn't able to keep writing about it, but that's not because I was being sanctioned. It's because it's a paper that has no bylines. And it's a standard rule that we don't get people who are strongly associated with one side of an argument to write on that topic. So if you were somebody who was a vociferous member of an environmental party, you wouldn't be the environment correspondent.
Mm.
So I just think that's moral. So yeah, as soon as I became the story at all, I was not able to write on this subject anymore. So, but by then you see, The Economist, by being such a great place to work, other people had taken it up. So it's continued to cover the topic very well. And so everything that was in the paper from 2018 wasn't written by me.
Yeah.
There might have been one piece, I can't remember past that, but it just basically the coverage was not by me. Cancellation is it's such an ill-defined word, and people tried to get me fired. But the funniest attempt, I don't know how many people, we're all terminally online in this. We all know, who Relationship and Purposes Robin is, or, when Sally Hines tweets, these are our in jokes. But one of them was this bloke called Anthony Watson, who tried to get himself invited to an economist conference on pride issues in the workplace, and tweeted at me really relentlessly for about 48 hours. And the thing was, he was an advisor to Dawn Butler, who at the time was Labour's LGBT spokesperson, and it really said some very stupid things. Anyway, he tweeted at me, and I immediately got a message from the head honcho at The Economist saying, I know what's going on. It's fine. Ignore. Well, I don't think she said ignore, and I certainly didn't ignore. So I just had a lot of fun saying, I'm not running this conference. It's in Hong Kong. Anthony, are you not able to read? And so on. But so, but in a different workplace, I'd have lost my job the next day.
Yeah.
So people tried, people complained about me to my employer several times. People internally complained, I'm pretty sure. I don't know that for sure, but I think so. They've every right to do that.
A recent podcast you did, you said that you gave up. It was a big thing to do. You had to think about it a lot because you gave up one of the last few remaining good jobs, decent jobs in journalism when you gave up being the finance editor at The Economist. And can you tell us about what made you make that decision? Because it was a fantastic job, and there, as you say, there aren't many available.
Yeah.
So what pushed you to do it?
So by the time I left, I wasn't finance editor anymore. I switched from being finance editor to doing that events job, and then I became Britain editor. So I think I'd been Britain editor for about a year. Had I become Britain editor when my book came out? I think I might just about. Yeah, I think that's right. I think I'd started that job then. But people move fairly frequently at The Economist, so that wasn't strange. And I still thought at that point, yes, I did. I took that job before the book came out, and I really thought that, I've got the book out, I've got that off my chest, and now I can focus on this. And, I did. Obviously, I threw myself into the job, but for a start, people kept wanting comment. But also the madness just continued. I mean, I'm sure everyone else feels the same, but this is going faster and faster. I'm getting dizzy every day. The speed of the insanity, but also because we are fighting back well in the UK, and the speed of the response, it's really every day that there's something happening legislatively, and sometimes it's good things, and the number of consultations we have to respond to. I'm just dizzy. So that became clear, and there's a concept that I discovered, and I feel a little hesitant saying it because it sounds like I'm appropriating something that's really big for something quite small. And that concept is, how was it explained to me? It's a moral injury, that's it. So the woman who was telling me about this is a woman who works in a women's centre. She runs it, in fact, and they're becoming very hard to run. I mean, they've always been hard to run, but the specific thing at the moment is just that, the funding is so difficult, and she was so reliant on contracts from probation that she just basically can never do the job that she's meant to do. And probation in the UK was the thing that was squeezed the most under austerity. So probation officers can't do their job either. So then they go sick. So then there's more burden on the ones that are left. And she said to me, do you know the concept of a moral injury? It's when you know what you should be doing, but you cannot do it, and it makes you sick. And so I hesitate to draw from that really horrific situation where you've got vulnerable women, you're trying to run a women's centre, you've got people in probation, But the fact is I was experiencing a moral injury, which was not imposed on me by The Economist, to be clear. It was that I knew what I should be doing and I couldn't do it. Because when you have a job somewhere, you have to limit what you say, to some extent at least. And obviously there's just the time element. I was doing a big job. I mean, it's a 60+ hour a week job, no question, probably more. And so I was feeling sick. I had a sore stomach the whole time. I became more and more really thinking every day, I can't cope with this anymore. But I was afraid because, I'm the primary breadwinner. I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids. You leave something like that, you never get back into it. You just have to accept that. It's not like if I did this 30 or 40 years ago, I could hope to come back into journalism at a similar level that I had left, or a bit lower. That's it. I'll never be offered a full-time job in journalism again because nobody offers them. I only had one because I had it since 2005.
Do you feel like you made the right choice?
Oh my God, it was just wonderful. My stomach hasn't hurt since.
Oh, wow.
So I rang Maya, who had, by this time, Maya was the only person I think who was being paid by Sex Matters, and she was, not being paid what she's worth by any means because Sex Matters was new. Maybe she had a little bit of admin help, I can't remember. It was very early on, and I said to her, is there any chance that I can work for you part-time? Because I needed to have some core income. And then I thought, I'll do a Substack. It's actually not run on Substack, but I still call it a Substack. I'll do some freelance journalism, and I'll take that leap of faith for the rest. And she spent a weekend scrabbling around trying to do a bit of fundraising to see if she couldn't say it was me. She just had to say, look, we've got a chance to have a hire that might be really important for us. And she got some money. And again, then they made a leap of faith. And then I came on a few days a week for Sex Matters. So Maya is still the only person who's full-time at Sex Matters. And we've got about 5 other people who are between point 1 and me, point 6. Actually, somebody else is point 8 time. But that was the core. And after that, I mean, I'm an atheist. I just live once. Every day that goes by. And also on this topic in particular, there's an incredible sense of urgency because every person who gets caught up in the ideology that we're opposing is somebody who is fighting against our rights. Like it's somebody who is seeking to overturn the long-standing principles that men stay out of women's spaces, et cetera, et cetera. And also every child, like every child who gets caught up in this, even if they don't end up being permanently medicalized, they miss a really crucial part of their youth, and you can't get that back. Like you can never get time back, but your teenage years, to not get them back, that's when you grow up. So every day there's more irreversible harm or damage, as Abigail Schreier said. And every day it becomes more embedded and it'll be harder to get back out. So, it's now or never. I must say, I did originally think that I would just take a year's leave of absence, and The Economist agreed to that. They gave me a year's leave of absence. Again, wishful thinking. I thought I could maybe make a big difference in a year and come back having got, again, hoping I'd scratched the itch or got it off my chest or whatever it was. But I now think I'll be doing this certainly until retirement age and possibly for the rest of my life. I had no idea how deep it had got.
Is there an audio version of your book?
Yes, there is. It didn't come out at the same time as my book, and my publisher tried to hawk it around. The way it works is you tend to sell the audio rights, and there are 10 companies in the UK that record audiobooks, and not one of them bought it, even though it was by now had been in the top 10. So because they knew they'd get grief, grief, it's not worth it to them. Like I would have had to be J.K. Rowling or somebody to get an audiobook. So I ended up recording it at home. My son, who is now a sound engineer, was still at university studying music tech, and he recorded it in the understairs cupboard for me. And we did it. He did his first. He hated it. He only likes music. He doesn't like spoken word. He actually recorded Louise Perry's book for her as well. She actually did get a deal, but he gave her a better deal. And he said he's never doing it again. He kept telling me how good her book was. I mean, it was actually very odd reading, and then they remove the inner parts of the penis and use the skin that remains. And my son is sitting outside this cupboard with a cable under the door. We literally hung duvets around the understairs cupboard is where the washing machine is, and I propped my laptop on top of the washing machine, and we hung duvets around it for sound reasons.
Have you changed your mind about anything? Do you think there's anything changing that went into the book that you need to do another book to sort of talk about?
I'm not doing another book on this. I feel I got about 95% where I wanted, which I did get to write it all down. I was in the right place in journalism at The Economist because although I love news and I like the human interest stories, it's always the ideas that interest me. So of course there's been a million stories since, but the ideas are the same. I mean, there's this one big idea that you can screw up these 2 fundamental categories and then you watch it ripple out. My editor helped me a lot in structuring it, and I think the structure stood up very well. The one thing that people do ask me about is pronouns. And I would have written the book with no preferred pronouns if I did it now. But, I just want to say a bit about that, which is I also coach writing. I coach writing for executives and civil servants and the like. And one of the things I say to them at the start is when you're writing, you have to be clear about your purpose, your audience, and your message. And when you think about your audience, what that means is where are they? You can't talk to people assuming that they understand what you think, assuming that you're right. That's the height of arrogance. And people understand that when they're thinking about, say, science, that your audience might be scientifically unsophisticated or very sophisticated. But if my audience is not going to listen to me, if I call a man every time, then it's on me to work out what to do. It's not on them. I can't just say, well, they shouldn't be like that. So it's my job to get my message across to people wherever they are. And people have maybe moved a fair bit, actually, since I started writing the book on this. And I find it more and more, I actually can't bear it myself. Like I find a moral injury every time, in fact, that I call a man a woman. so there was one segment where I worked very hard to remove pronouns altogether, and that was the bit about Jessica Yaniv. I would have done more of that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's the one thing I think I'd change.
I think that's probably the most helpful way for us to progress, is to, if we disagree, is to disagree, try to educate each other, to work out what's the best way of communicating and moving forward with this. So yeah, well,
And also
that's
different audiences. I'm in various chats with people that I know completely agree with me on, men are men and women are women. So there I talk about men as men and women are women. But if I were to be invited onto something else, or if I were trying to persuade a bunch of teenagers who've drunk the Kool-Aid, I'd start with where they are and work out what I want them to understand. And that's just standard good writing practice. I think every domain has its own professional norms, but also its guiding principles. And in journalism, it's don't mislead your audience. So that's why to not say trans woman. I mean, Julia Long, she's right about many, many things, but she's very specifically right on that. Nobody can remember, not even one of us, and we've been in this for years, can remember what the hell that is. Is it a man who thinks he's a woman or a woman who thinks he's a man? And you get tripped up. I still get tripped up. So if you can possibly in those spaces, you just talk about, men who identify as women or men who claim to be women or Tims or whatever it was you want to use. But in another space, you've got to do the extra cognitive work because you don't want to mislead your audience, but you also want to get your message across.
Radical feminists tend to be gender abolitionists, and we want to get rid of gender, which we see as a means of oppressing women and girls. And so we sort of see it as the method by which women are oppressed, or one of the methods. So gender itself, the sex role stereotypes, the forcing of women into those boxes. And so we just say, let's just get rid of gender. And so an example would be, I haven't got any makeup on and I haven't got female hair. And I'm not dressing in the box that the patriarchy wants to put me into. So that would be rejecting, that's abolishing gender to some extent, or to, in quite a large extent, actually. Do you know, or can you shed light on what gender critical is?
So gender critical beliefs are protected, is now a legal fact in the UK. But it's like saying Christianity. Like, what does Christianity mean? Like, I was actually just writing about this myself yesterday. So to say that a belief is protected in UK law, this is relevant. This is not me trying to dodge the question, but the answer is not really going to be about gender. It has to pass the 5 Granger criteria, which is a test that's set out in a precedent-setting court case. And the 5th one is the relevant one. It's the one that says, is it worthy of respect in a democratic society, or does it inherently trample on other people's rights? So incredibly, in her first tribunal, Maya's judgment said that believing that there are 2 sexes, those sexes can't change, and that matters sometimes, was a belief that was so hateful that it trampled on other people's rights and was not worthy of respect in a democratic society. Anyway, you can't just say a belief is in that category or not. You have to know what the person believes. And that'd be true for Christianity. Like, if by Christianity you meant stone witches, stone adulteresses, burn witches, whatever it is they do to gay people, I'm not sure, in the Old Testament, then obviously that's not worthy of respect in a democratic society. But another person's Christian belief, like mainstream Christian beliefs, are. So I guess GC is the way it's used is that it's a placeholder word for any sort of belief that not just that there are 2 sexes and that the sexes can't change, but that you must pay attention to that fact on occasion, and specifically you must pay attention to that fact for women's sake. So why that's got called gender critical is a bloody good question. I mean, I tend to call it sex realist now. And then, of course, because they love twisting your words, they say that I'm trying deliberately to get the echo of race realist, which is the way that people launder racist theories about different racial groups. But all I'm saying is there are 2 sexes, and if you don't pay attention to that, you harm women because of the male default, because of male strength, because specifically it's women who need accommodation because we have the children, and that's an enormous burden on women that requires societal accommodation because of rape, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it's anything to do with gender, in fact, gender critical. Like, I think it's just a placeholder phrase that ended up, for some reason, being the one that's used. It's not a good phrase for it. And I mean, this sort of rock bottom thing, I suppose it would be possible. We were trying to unpick this recently in a conversation I was having. Like, it's quite annoying that sex is real and immutable is part of a belief, because it's not a belief, it's a fact. But the thing is, facts aren't protected under UK discrimination, anti-discrimination law, only beliefs. But actually, it's possible that you could believe that there are two sexes and that they're immutable, or know that to be a fact, but think it's totally unimportant. And that women who are saying, I need to be able to foreground this, sometimes I need to be able to say that person's a man, not a woman, or vice versa. I mean, mostly the man, not a woman, that they're just being bigots. Like, so I think quite a lot of our critics, they won't have articulated it that way, but that's the position they're in. They know perfectly well there's two sexes. They know which sex their mother is. They know that trans women aren't women, but they think it's very mean to say it because it doesn't matter that there are two sexes. So the bedrock belief, I think, the one that we have to, defend at all costs, and the belief that sex matters is specifically about, is two sexes, immutable, and that matters especially for women. And we might say now, and safeguarding. Not just us, but, people who care about free speech, people who care about pluralism, and actually religious people who, have very strong feelings, as I do, sort of as a hangover from my Catholic childhood, of the sort of sacredness of childhood. Like, I have a moral, ethical, disgust when I see the way that they talk about children as if they're plug and play things that you can move bits of their bodies. And I know that the emotion I'm feeling is one that comes from a feeling of sacredness and awe, even though I am atheist. So any religious person who wants to join with me on that ground is very, very welcome to. So it's a very broad church set of beliefs. It was a great short summation of it all by Lucy Hunter Blackburn on Twitter today. I saw, she said, it's very interesting that you look around the world and you see it's the same three legislative elements that they go for. First is gender self-ID, which is what they want. Then the other two are a conversion therapy ban and what's the other one?
Hate speech.
Hate speech, that's right. So hate speech means that you can't talk about it. And conversion therapy ban means when it actually comes up against you, as in you are going to be forced to do something, like a parent literally forced to allow their daughter to bind her breasts or whatever, you'll have to do it. And so now they've won if they get those three. And what are Sex Matters plans for 2024 if we're free to discuss them? Well, of course, they were likely to see a change of government at some point here. I'm not saying anything that's secret here. So the current government, does have some awareness of how bad things have got. Of course, it all happened under the Conservatives. This isn't me trying to make an anti-Labour point, but we have got people in government like Kemi who understand the issues. So whatever we can get before there's a change of government, and the three most important things would be to stop any conversion therapy ban, to get decent schools guidance actually published, and if possible, to correct the Equality Act so that gender reassignment is entirely separate from sex. Those will be the very sort of focused things. But more generally, we think that we need to be thinking a lot more, all of us in this movement, about safeguarding principles. Because once somebody starts to think about safeguarding in this in this area, they realize like just how you have to go the whole way back, and it gives you a good tool. Other people are doing specific things on, say, sports and so on, but we thought that schools were really essential, because that's where the kids get indoctrinated, and also because they're closed environments where nobody has a GRC and where safeguarding is meant to come first. Healthcare will be the next thing that people need to do more on. Already we're way behind on that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion philosophy. Again, this is another of those things. It's like this is a perfect storm, isn't it? Like you can look at it through that lens, or you can look through this lens. The sort of thinking of people as characteristics and the thinking of people as very self-defined seem to me to play an enormous part in all of this. Like young people take it as a given that you shouldn't speak about things unless you too are a Chinese, bisexual immigrant with a single parent, or whatever your specific characteristics are. And I mean, this is so inimical to the liberal values that created science. It throws away everything that got us everything that I actually value in a modern, liberal economy. And then the idea that you define yourself also, like, when I've seen people who are willing to talk, the very occasional people who are willing to talk who very much disagree with the sorts of things I say, like they will always say, like, nobody can tell you who you are except yourself. And you're like, really? Like, I mean, loads of people can tell me that I'm middle-aged and female and a bunch of other things, Is there a fear that gender ideologues will also use the right to belief in law to win cases? Well, the right to belief in law is very, very specific. to the beliefs. So if someone wants to say that they believe that men can be women, I mean, think of all the mad things that people believe and that you can't fire them because they believe it. That's completely fine. If someone wants to believe that men can be women and they don't do anything about it at work and they don't cause trouble in the pub, then fine. But if somebody believes that men can be women and that means that men have to be allowed to do things that directly or indirectly impact upon women's rights, then that's the argument that you'd be having about worthy of respect in a democratic society. So a man who thinks that he can do, for example, intimate exams on a woman as a doctor, when that woman has said she wants to be seen by a female doctor, that's a man who's committing sexual assault, and his belief is then not worthy of respect in a democratic society. And if he were to be sacked for doing that, he should not have protection under UK employment law. That's the way the argument would go. Hate speech, conversion therapy, and just gender self-ID in the first place. Like, that's the basis of it. Get the gender self-ID in, make it impossible to talk about, make it impossible to stop anyone from doing what they want. When am I standing for Parliament? I would rather die. I've no patience. They spend their time doing, it's great work, someone has to do it, but I couldn't bear it.
So we're now going to hear from Luba Fein, who is a feminist activist and sex trade survivor and abolitionist. She's a volunteer at the feminist organisation Filia and is going to talk about a woman's rights to her body. Is it relevant to the sex industry discussion? So welcome, Luba, and over to you.
At the end of my previous speech about the Nordic model, about 3 months ago, a woman from the US asked me a question. She wanted to know how to deal with the following argument. Why does a woman have the right to her body to have an abortion, but not to be in prostitution or surrogacy? This was the question and the argument. So why do we respect the woman's choice in one situation and in the other we do not? I have encountered this argument several times. So why indeed? What is the difference? And the answer is that there are 3 big problems with the whole discourse and with the choice arguments, both in general and in particular when applied to the sex industry. So let's start. My first problem with the concept of free choice is that the entire discourse suits the academy better than reality. Because what is a choice anyway? Are we choosing something when the alternative is physical harm to us or our families? This is a prevalent situation in prostitution. Or are we choosing something when we have no idea about the consequences? This is an even more common situation in prostitution. It is impossible to understand how prostitution affects a woman before she is actually there. And when you are at the lowest point of your life, physically, mentally, and socially, and you cannot make an active change that requires enormous resources, do you choose not to change? Because this is the situation of almost every woman in prostitution. So choice is a very vague concept. We do not have clear definitions for it, and people use it way too often to abandon the needy and sleep peacefully. My second problem with the choice argument is that our right to choose is never a sufficient condition to justify a social practice. The choice is merely a minimum standard. A legitimate social practice must meet several other criteria. We do not allow debt bondage by choice. We do not allow payment of wages below the minimum. And we do not allow domestic violence because the woman chose a violent husband. And here is my third and the biggest problem with the choice argument. Even if 100% of the women did not enter prostitution under coercion and threats, this is not the case, but let's assume so for the sake of discussion. We must still use additional criteria to test the legitimacy of the practice. And when we talk about social practices as feminists, we must do a macro analysis. The whole discourse about individual choice is suitable for the psychologist's coach. But feminism is a sociological body of knowledge, not psychological. And feminist analysis is always macro. So when we do a macro analysis of abortions, prostitution, and surrogacy, we clearly see that, that these are very different practices in essence. Abortions are a medical service that women need. The need for abortions comes from the women. Although even in the field of medicine, we have profit industries such as the cosmetic surgery industry or some other industries, abortions are nothing like that. I have never seen anywhere in the world a commercial advertisement that convinces women to have an abortion with the benefits of an abortion and the excellent abortion experience precisely at this clinic. We don't have ads like this. Abortion is a women's need that women have had to fight for throughout in the history. They usually receive a partial solution to it, and not everywhere. So when abortions are prohibited by law, they do not disappear. The women continue to undergo them and risk their life for them. But prostitution is not a medical service. It's not a medical need. It is an industry. Of course, it's not a legitimate industry because it sells sexual exploitation. But even if you don't fully understand it, you cannot claim that it exists because women want it. Even if we pretend that prostitution is just work, the suggestion that the choices of prostituted individuals drive the industry is nonsensical. Businesses are driven by customer demand, whether authentic or artificial. No industry exists simply because the workers want it. Even legitimate industries like hotels or textiles, they don't exist because workers want it. It is the demand that creates jobs for them. The same goes for prostitution. And of course, I'm not trying to say that prostitution, women in prostitution enjoy conditions that remind those of legitimate industries. I'm only explaining why industries in general exist. The sex trade is not the women's choice, but the pimps and Johns' choice. Prostitution exists whether women choose it or not. The pimps will sell as many women as they can. Women's choices are not a factor. For the same reason exactly, there is no point in trying to eradicate prostitution by improving the social conditions in the country. I don't know if you came across a slogan that pimp lovers like very much. Don't fight prostitution, fight poverty. So don't fight them, fight poverty. But they try to imply that prostitution is simply the poor woman's way of getting rich. But what do you think would happen if all the women were rich in a particular country? Does anyone really believe that pimps and Johns will simply say, well, friends, the women don't want to be prostitutes. Let's close the business and go home. They won't say so. Their ways of getting women for their business have nothing to do with women's desires. They threaten women, they lie to women, they manipulate, they traffic vulnerable women and girls from abroad, they extort women, they exploit girls who lack family support. The methods are not lacking, and the new methods are created every moment. None of them is related to what the women really want. The same goes for surrogacy. It is an industry. And the primary beneficiaries are surrogacy agencies and private clinics. The source of demand for that industry is people who do not want or cannot give birth to a child naturally. And the surrogates, they're not the ones who choose the industry to exist. About 2 years ago, I interviewed for a podcast my dear friend from Ukraine. Her name is Maria Dmitrieva. Many of you know her. She told me that in the war-torn areas of eastern Ukraine, with collapsing infrastructure, you can often see in public transport surrogacy agencies ads. the ads invite women to become surrogates. In countries with a legal sex industry, we can see big ads for brothels. Check who paid for these ads, and you will find out who exactly moves the wheels of those industries, who choose prostitution to exist, and who choose a surrogate to exist. And these are not the women. Thank you. One interesting question was what's about ethical porn? And another comment in the chat that I have seen was that in the West, all prostitutes are choosing it unless they're trafficked. So they're choosing it unless they're not choosing it, and that's why I'm against the Nordic model. So I think we can like unite to those two comments and ask again, what does it mean? How do we know what is ethical porn or ethical prostitution, and what does it mean women are trafficked or not trafficked? So if we are speaking about trafficking, if we use the definitions of Palermo Protocol, which I personally agree, so trafficking, it includes all sorts of prostitution where individuals were prostituted by many methods, as I said, and one of them was exploiting vulnerabilities. So I have been in the sex trade, and after more than 30 years, I'm fighting against the sex trade after exiting it. I have never, ever seen a single woman who was in prostitution and who wasn't vulnerable in some way. Women in prostitution are always they're always there because of sort of vulnerability, whether they were either born with that vulnerability or vulnerability was created in prostitution. Everyone is vulnerable. And now we are talking about ethical porn and how we can separate between by choice and trafficking. So recently we have a organization, Prostitution Research and Education, founded by Melissa Farley. She is here in this chat. So this group published a very important research among women in pornography in Sweden. I was among her research assistants, and I'm very proud of it. I put in the chat link to the research. Please, I beg you, please read this report if you ever asked yourself about ethical porn. So what is the criteria for porn to be ethical? Like intuitively, I would say porn that didn't harm the people in it. If porn that harmed the women exploited or photographed in it cannot be ethical. So how do we know whether women are harmed or not harmed? Intuitively, do you know any woman who would be not harmed, injured, damaged by being presented in the way like in modern porn, like we can say it? I know no woman in that. But in our research, we actually researched a sample of women, and we asked them what they experienced in porn and what were the consequences of porn on them. And we found out that the vast majority of women were harmed in a very severe way. Please read about it. And moreover, most women interviewed by us, they didn't agree to be photographed for porn. And most women don't even know when they were photographed or videotaped or where they weren't. So even the most pathetic basic criteria for consent doesn't exist in modern porn. In Sweden, a Western country, where as someone among the participants said, women are by choice unless they're trafficked. So you decide, please, whether women who do not know whether they were photographed or women who were not asked, not paid. Many women are photographed by pimps and johns without giving any consent. Ethical porn cannot exist, and even if it existed, like some magical creature, when people watch the video, they cannot know anything about that woman. Is this woman suffering? Was it damaged? Maybe she committed suicide due to porn consequences. We cannot know it. So ethical porn cannot exist as general idea. And the same about women being in prostitution by choice. How do you know? How do you know which woman in prostitution is by choice? Any research that we examine now shows that women are desperately willing to exit prostitution, but they have no resources, emotional, physical, economic, social support. They have no resources to do it.